I woke screaming, though I couldn't hear it. My mouth stretched open, but there were no lungs behind it. Just wet cords twitching in my chest cavity, like roots jerking away from the light. The sound that came out wasn't mine. My skin broke open in strips as I tried to gasp. The air crawled in on its own, coiling through me like something alive, like it had been waiting for the breach. My throat filled with metal, salt, and a noise like distant laughter played through water. It tasted of copper. The sensation lingered in my teeth. Breathing didn't stop the panic. If anything, the more I drew in, the further from myself I felt. I couldn't stand. My legs had no shape, more strands, tight, moving. It was like watching meat under a heat lamp, shriveling and curling, but still aware. I reached for my face and found it unmade. No shape where the nose should have been, fingers slipping over unfamiliar contours. Something flexed along my jawline that shouldn't have moved. I tried to say my name just to anchor myself, but it wouldn't form. The syllables bent in my mouth like soft iron. The harder I forced it, the worse it became, as if the act itself was a mistake. Whatever was listening didn't want that name spoken. Instead, I got echoes, half-familiar sounds that turned liquid between my ears. Things pulsed in the distance, not engines and not stars. Colors that had no lineage in the spectrum, burning in rhythmic flashes behind the eyes. Every time they flickered, a pain like gravity dragged through my stomach. I felt pulled across invisible angles. I knew I was somewhere. I just didn't know how far from where I'd been. The pain helped me remember, just enough to know I had been hurt, more than hurt. Shifted inside out. I dug my fingers into the ground once I could find it. It was warm, damp like skin, with the give of raw hide. It sucked at my hands as I tried to push against it. I smelled iron, sweat, something like rot. Blinking came back slowly, one eyelid at a time, and when it did, I saw outlines moving in the dark haze, shapes like people. Some writhing, some boneless, some just lying still, as if waiting to see how much of them would remain come morning. I don't know how long I lay waiting for coherence. Time didn't work properly anymore. Memory folded in on itself in little loops. I'd remember waking up, then forget I'd done it at all, then recall something else entirely, like a deck corridor or a voice shouting last devotions. The memory of open space outside a viewing slit. Stars no longer still, pitch swirling against the hull like it had eyes. I remembered now where I'd been before here. But here was something different. Everything about it told me there was no safety in knowing, no forgiveness in understanding, only survival, stripped to its shape, not life exactly, just continuation. We were between warp jumps when it started. The Saint Judicant was an old ark vessel, stripped of weapons, carrying a full quarter hold of reliquary seekers from Verdis Hive. Pilgrims mostly, some minor clergy, a few sanctioned psychers, too brittle or too lowborn for assignment. I was on billet as deck brace mechanic and auxiliary pressurist. It was a quiet run, one of those hopeful routes plotted on margin charts. Interior reft before the cataclysm, maybe once part of a major trade spine. Most of the cargo was ceremonial. Banner threads soaked in martyr's ichor, a cask of preserved vox sermons, and a blackened femur reputedly torn from St. Tova's murdered confessor. The Praxis Sermontide said the planet it came from was holy. We never saw it. The warp saw us first. I still remember the sound the Geller field made when it failed. It stuttered, not like a machine breaking, but like someone clearing their throat. Then this low scratching started under the deck plating, and the lights flickered to crimson. Everyone thought we'd hit turbulence. We'd been briefed on that. You're trained to seal stations, tighten gravity lines, hold prayer posture. No screaming unless the autochoral systems give the cry. But those systems never engaged. The machine spirit was already drowned. I had just climbed down from the upper conduit yap when the field went. I watched 3 pilgrims near Hab Deck 3 simply stop moving. Not fall, not panic, just stop. Their eyes went wide, and their skin started pulping like curdled milk. One of them, an old man with a Mars red pilgrimage tattoo, just fell apart, not exploded, not shredded. His body lost the idea of being a body. All this inside 10 seconds. That's how fast it breaks down. All those lectures about hygiene seals and containment drills didn't mean anything. You get sick with unreality the same way you get sick from radiation. You can't see it, but your bones start muttering soon enough. We lost the bridge by the time I got to Deck 4. No answers from the command Vox link. Just static that sounded like breathing. The ship groaned in places it shouldn't have been able to. Warp ingress. I've heard the term, read the manuals, but I saw it with my own eyes. It's not a crack or a flash or some storm outside the hull like in picked feeds. It's more like watching soap rot across the surface of water, but it was the air that began to ripple, and the walls moved with it. Not broke. Moved, like skin thinking about what to do next. People ran, not to escape, I think, but to feel like they were still part of something that made sense. Brother Premels, our assigned confessor, opened his travel lectern and called the penance rites for acts of unreason. He stood there as people tore past him. Maybe he thought that if enough litanies went up, the presence would respect formality. He was the first to vanish in full, to blank away, like being unmade from the ledger. No ashes, not even his teeth, just gone. I tried to reach Vector section, thought if I could plug into the compartmental seal drive, we could isolate most of the stern hold, but none of the magnetic pulses responded. The Holy Intercessor Cogitator Core was blank, not deactivated, blank, like it had never known power. I found 2 scavenge servitors inside the guidance housing, shaking, not spasming, shaking like cold meat. I know that doesn't make sense. Doesn't matter. I left them behind. When the Saint Judicant came apart, it didn't explode. It peeled. That's the word. Peeled, open like cooked hide, slits running down the angles of its vector plates. No fire, no pressure blowout, just openings. And beyond them, not space, not void either. Just color. Not even color, really. Things we don't have words for. It poured in first like gas, but it had shape, and I saw it deciding. Watching. Everyone froze when they saw it. Some knelt, some screamed until their tongues snapped. That's when it entered us. Not by touch, by noticing. I don't remember hitting the ground. Just the moment after. The ship was gone. The noise of it carried off into nothing. Some of us were left behind, not inside a wreck, just on something else. A place that isn't a ship, though the air still smells of steel and oil underneath. The sky moves, slowly, like liquid sifted through 1,000 narrow mouths. I saw fragments of hull folded into the horizon, twisted at angles too clean to be natural, a bulk servitor's chest plate still twitching. Debris from the communications mast jammed halfway into a slope of bone-colored stone. There were others, not many. Faces I recognized by clothes more than features. Their bodies didn't fit right. Not anymore. Marit from galley detail was anchored by her feet to the slope, but her arms were growing outward in loops, branching at the elbows. She screamed, I think, but her mouth was full of roots. Maybe not roots, maybe just nerves stealing air. I watched another man, Hoff, a dunnage loader, crawl in a circle for hours, never stopping. I couldn't tell if he was trying to escape or if he thought that was walking. I stayed still for a long time after that. No sign of where the bridge section fell. No chance of contact. I don't think there was direction here. I picked up a metal strut as a weapon a while back, but it's soft now. The metal runs like wax every few hours until I have to reshape it again. It doesn't seem to mind. Neither do I. We failed the jump. That's a technicality. The ship is gone. The doors are all open now, and we're breathing things we shouldn't be able to breathe. I know now that surviving the fall wasn't survival. It was the start of something else. Something that doesn't end. Out here, there's no chain of command. Not like the guard, not like ship hierarchy. There's order, but it breathes through different lungs. On the Saint Judicant, I knew where I stood. Bottom end of pressurist duties, red metal uniform, answerable to deck overseer Brannick and the spur minders under him. Now Brannick is a smeared shape on the horizon, half swallowed by the ground, and I answer to other things. I don't know what to call them. Not demons, not exactly. That word feels too clean, too narrow. They don't bark orders, they act in patterns. You feel what they want, like pressure changes before a storm. You respond because otherwise something peers through the skin of the air, and your bones start shivering before you've moved. They feed off emotion, not randomly. It's measured. I've seen it. We're not prisoners, not the way I understand it. We're attended to, watched, prodded into significance. Fear, longing, shame, joy. It's all currency. They draw it out of us like ventilation draws smoke. That's why nobody dies quickly here. Pain is slowed down. Grief is preserved, turned over like a relic. There are no forms to file or commands to follow, but the structure's still there. Rules exist. Steps have to be performed. You can feel it in the air, like static waiting for discharge. The moment you think you're free to act, the world reminds you there's a sequence you missed. Call it habit, call it heresy, but I still try to pray. Low murmurs, just to hear myself sound like a person. The words don't come right. They twist halfway through and end in languages I never learned. Once I tried a full recitation of the Litany of Perseverance, 36 verses, committed to memory and basic ship drill, and I made it to verse 12 before the ground around me started humming. No sound, just vibration, like dozens of voices mouthing along quietly, mouthing it in mockery. Then my voice stopped working. My lips kept moving, but I wasn't deciding. I cut it short. Sat still. For hours. I don't think it wants rebellion. I don't think it wants worship either. It wants structure. Obedience makes the place feel thicker, like it runs smoother when you play along. I remember standing before the quartermaster's shrine back on Verdus Hive, watching processed masses chant through incense and fatigue, just waiting for ration clearance. Same feeling. Compliance carried in the posture, not belief. Something here mimics that, but it's turned inside out. Prayer becomes self-damnation. Routine becomes sacrifice by repetition. You swear little oaths just to hold your mind in one piece, and those oaths get absorbed, used. The air recognizes them. Sometimes I hear feedback, my own words, spoken back to me hours later, but in other voices. Wrong cadences. Familiar phrases, repeated without context. There's another one, Kirel. She was medici assist, not clergy. Kept her calm when the ship went. She tried organizing survivors, even staged a triage post with bandage stock from her satchel. Kept saying, structure gives the mind integrity. I saw her yesterday, or what's left now. She's sitting inside a trench that wasn't there the day before, rearranging bones into piles, sorted by size or use. She isn't scared. She talks while she works. Says the bones asked politely. Part of her must still think she's helping. People break here, same as before, but not in chaos. They break into functions, roles, shapes that fit into whatever organizing principle this place calls hierarchy. We get slotted, filed. That's the structure. There's no command barked over vox, just pressure-shaping behavior until it no longer feels like coercion. Even madness feels consistent, familiar. You start waking up with tasks in your head that nobody gave you, and you do them because that's what being sane means now, performing without question. I used to report to Overseer Brannick for work status. Now I report to the sky. I don't speak. I just feel my place shift into alignment when the air stills for half a second. The laughter stops. The light corrects itself. I know I've done well because the world allows it. That's what passes for reward. That's what passes for order. I watched Brother Harrow come apart over the course of 3 days. He was the last to go silent after the field collapsed, his voice carrying above the rest even when there was no breath left behind it. He kept reciting, even as the words buckled under the weight of wrong syllables and new noises. At first, it sounded like he was struggling to stay sane. Then it sounded like something was helping him talk. After the second day, I realized he no longer paused for breath. He just kept going. His body didn't change all at once. It was like watching mold take root, not violent, just slow and steady. First, his skin turned translucent, like parchment stretched over wet stone. His ribs stood out too sharply, and light started shining through the gaps in his chest. Veins glowed one by one, then linked together into branching paths that pulsed with rhythm not tied to any human heart. His mouth widened. Not a tear, not a dislocation. The jaw just unhinged calmly, like it had always meant to. From that yawning hole came a sound I don't have words for. Nothing painful, not even loud. A tone, pure, nearly pleasant. Some part of me wanted to get closer without knowing why. I didn't, not at first. I stayed behind one of the jutting slabs near the blood-glass ridge, just watching. Others did go to him. Marit, somehow still moving despite the roots. She reached for him like a child would a reliquary. Hoff stopped his crawling and went on hands and knees. They weren't praying, but the motion looked close. Harrow didn't acknowledge them, just kept projecting that sound. Mouth slack, eyes rolled white. They knelt there for hours, and by the end of it, they weren't kneeling anymore. Marit began to sway, her limbs twitching out of sequence. Her arms folded into themselves, like string soaked in solvent. Hoff's chest opened, or maybe dissolved, and something in it blinked twice. I crawled away after that. I told myself I was still trying to survive, but the reality was simpler. I was too afraid to join. And somewhere in my head, it felt like a betrayal. Harrow had been faithful, obsessed, yes, but disciplined. When the rest of us failed to hold on, he stuck to his verses, even when they peeled off into gibberish and noise. He did what priests are supposed to do, stand between the void and the weak. Trouble is, he stood too long. The void reached through him, found the gap between repetition and belief, and used it like a channel. After that, more started to change. Not just the old pilgrims, the ones who'd never spoken before started orating fragments of scripture no one taught them. Faces I didn't know began to twist into echoes of Harrow's, blank, smooth cheeks, black eyes like burned glass. I didn't hear screaming so much anymore, just that same vowel hymn in different pitches, overlapping no matter how far apart they stood. They didn't hunt. They didn't eat. They showed others how to listen. Kirel came back into it after a while. Still sorting bones by pattern, but she hummed now, matching the rhythm exactly. She'd found a new order, cleaner than her old one. That's when I realized this wasn't madness, not the kind we talked about in shipboard safety drills. It wasn't all random. They didn't flail or moan. Their motions were consistent, deliberate. Each changed person seemed to settle into a form of usefulness, whether making noise, reshaping limbs, or tending the ground with root nails. It looked coordinated, but without force. They volunteered. That terrified me more than the warp storms, or the monsters I'd been taught about. Because now I'd seen one of ours turn, not from fear or hunger or despair, but from conviction. Harrow didn't scream as he became whatever he is now. He just adjusted, found a new faith. The others weren't infected, they were convinced. There's a slope to this place, more subtle than gravity. Things bend toward whatever truth is thickest in the air. Every time I think about praying, I remember what came out of Harrow's mouth, how clean it sounded, how sure. And I catch myself wondering if maybe that's better than this silence in my own head. That's the danger. It all feels like belief, even when it's not yours. And that's how they get you. Not with chains, not with fire, but with the chance to mean something again. The first time I noticed the glow in my veins, I thought it was light leaking through my skin from some outside source. Then I realized it pulsed with my heartbeat. Only it wasn't steady. It surged when I felt frightened, brightened when I stared too long at the moving sky. Sometimes it dimmed without cause, as if something behind my ribs exhaled and settled. I tried ignoring it, but the sensation never left. A warm scrape beneath the epidermis, like tiny teeth sharpening along blood vessels. It looks faint from the outside, pale blue, sometimes run through with dull violet, but when I press my fingers against the vessels in my wrist, it jumps under the skin like it's waiting to be named. Memory is worse now, not gone, but entangled. When I try to recall my mother's voice, I get a corridor instead. A low-lit one, with copper piping along the walls and a dull stain beneath the vent grates. I don't know if it's from the ship or from here. When I think about ship drills, I smell burnt cloth and hear the laughter of someone I've never met. I stopped trying to draw clear lines. The frames of my thoughts don't hold shape anymore. Could be the air, or the ground, or the breach in my body that stays unopened and doesn't bleed. Doesn't need to. Pain stopped meaning what it used to. It doesn't sting or throb. It just announces itself, sometimes lightly, a stretch behind the eyes, a twist in my heel that jerks sideways for an hour before it disappears. Once, I peeled skin from my forearm with a shard of plate metal, just to watch. There was no pain, only warmth. The flesh beneath squirmed a little. Threads moved like they knew how to repair themselves. Faces swam in the wound. Not faces exactly, but the memory of them, like an after-image stamped in the raw tissue. They spoke without sound. I understood some of it, the way you understand a gesture. They thanked me. The cut resealed before I could make the second incision. No scar, just that faint itch of something learning. I didn't do it again after that. Not because it hurt, but because I didn't want them to get eager. That's what it felt like. Eagerness. Like whatever's inside understands the shape of a man and wants to help, but doesn't remember what one looks like. I've lost track of time again. Sometimes that means hours. Once it meant 3 days, judging by the growth on my back when I woke up. A thin shelf of skin like cartilage, curved like a fan. It dries out when I stay still too long. I wrap it in torn cloth now. I don't know if it's part of me or a graft from somewhere else. It doesn't hurt. It whispers when I roll onto my side at night. I'm careful not to listen. I still think in I. That's what keeps me cautious. I watch the others shift from saying me to we to nothing at all. When Marit's noises stopped being syllables, she didn't struggle. Just looked at me with that wide-eyed calm and clicked her fingers against the ground until sound answered. Kirel still does tasks, but she refers to hands and legs like they aren't hers. I asked once if she remembered her name. She said names are pressure vessels. They burst when filled past capacity, then laughed too long. I don't bring it up anymore. When I sleep, I dream, but they're not mine. I see machines underwater, too complex to name, bending around walls, their parts made of muscle. I see processions of skinless pilgrims ringing bells with teeth. Once, I dreamed I was the Saint Judicant herself, bleeding steam from 1,000 breaches, feeling every crew death like rusted nails driven into a hull. That's when I started muttering aloud during the day. Not prayers, just affirmations. I'm here. I'm watching. I'm only what I know. But I know less by the day. The ground gives back when I walk on it. My weight doesn't feel real anymore. I passed a rock shaped like a stairwell panel and tried to remember how heavy toolkits used to feel. Could barely picture my locker code. That was Thursday. I think it was Thursday. I marked the day by cutting a notch into my arm, but the skin's flush now, not even a discoloration. I keep wondering if I'm still human. The question isn't abstract. It's mechanical, operational. Is the ratio still above 50%? Are my choices still mine? If I found a Vox line today and the Astra Telepathica answered, could I speak contact true, or would I make vowel sounds like Harrow? Would they call for an extraction or a quarantine order? Sometimes I say my name aloud just to fix position. It never lands right. The consonants shift, vowel placement slips. In my head, I still know the shape of it, but the moment I speak it, the sound jumps away, echoes somewhere it shouldn't. The silence that follows feels pleased. I don't plan anymore. I don't move toward goals. I observe impulse windows and respond. I sleep where it's dim, eat when not nauseated. I file details in the shape of old logs, mental records, day code missing. It helps. A little. When I feel the tissues in my legs untwine and retighten without cause, I log it. When the sky drops one notch lower than the hour before, I take internal note. I am watching. That's the last position I hold, the last duty. I watch what happens, to me, to the others. I don't write about hope. There's no angle for it. Only a slow measure of how much I still recognize myself by function. My hand still grips. My mouth still closes when I tell it. My thoughts are fragmented, but they respond to prompts. That's human enough for now. When those elements go, I won't fight, I think. I'll just shift into the next shape. Maybe that's what this place wants after all. A smooth transition, no resistance, no permission required, just readiness. I tried to leave once, thought I could outrun whatever was happening to me. There was a line of jagged rock outcroppings in the distance, half submerged in pink soil, shaped like collapsed chandeliers. On the horizon behind them, I saw something that looked like a city. It shimmered the way heat does on metal plating, just enough to hold the idea of streets and spires. It might have been real. It might have been something I wanted to be real. That didn't matter. I needed movement, anything besides waiting for myself to change. The first few steps were normal, felt like walking used to. Weight, forward drive, impact. Then the ground began to resist, not like swamp mud or sand. It gave way uniformly, pulling at each foot like a memory of what gravity used to be. I leaned forward harder. My body followed, but the forward motion didn't match the effort. I checked the terrain behind me and saw my prints planted in place, unbroken. I tried to run. The horizon didn't shift. I looked down and my legs were still moving, faster now, but the scenery only destabilized slightly at the edges. The sky above pulsed in time with my heartbeat, then shifted faster, matching my breath. I think something was watching how hard I wanted it. After an hour, I started sinking. First the ankles, then thighs. The surface didn't ripple. It accepted me, like I was returning to it, not invading. I clawed forward, to anything, but my hand slid over my own reflection. Not light, not water. It was like crawling across polished flesh that looked just enough like mine to unsettle me. I saw my face stretched under me, longer than real, jaw out of alignment, looking up. I don't know if it was mirroring my expression or showing me a version I was becoming. It mouthed something. I couldn't hear it. I shoved my knuckles down against it to blur the image, but my own skin pulsed with heat at the contact. That's when I stopped moving. It took me most of the day to get back, only I hadn't gone anywhere. The others were still nearby, muttering their devotions, if that's what they were still called. I checked the stones I had passed. They were untouched. Whatever effort I'd made hadn't displaced anything. When I pulled my rations out, the cloth bag unraveled in my hands, as if the fiber remembered it shouldn't exist anymore. That was the cost. Movement without permission. The air didn't punish me outright. It just made the attempt irrelevant, then let me feel the failure afterward. I've stopped guessing about time, but later I noticed another trick. I leaned against a slope and thought. Not about much. Just memories, or fragments of what used to matter. When I stood up again, a trench had formed behind me, Perfect lines, right angles, hand-wide indentations where joints had rested. I hadn't moved. My body had etched itself into the world. Not in dust or mud, in the substance of the place, like it had watched me thinking and recorded the gesture. Maybe that's what time is here, a record of passivity. There's an awareness that rides inside everything. It doesn't speak, it anticipates. The farther I reach, mentally or physically, the tighter it loops my actions in on themselves. I used to talk to a servitor adept back on Verdus Hive, man named Cordic, who coded behavioral loops into guidance mechs. He said the trick wasn't programming the path, it was designing moments that felt like decisions. You let the unit think it had agency, only it didn't. Doesn't matter to the output. That's how this place treats me. It lets me shuffle the variables, make small revisions to narrative, so long as the destination remains the same. The worst part isn't the trap, it isn't even being watched. It's knowing that the thing watching understands me more thoroughly than I ever did. Every impulse, every tick of guilt. It doesn't need to break me. It just folds me back onto myself over and over until collapse looks like a willing gesture. There's no voice, no final verdict, just conditions. You learn them, or you dissolve trying. I used to think the Eye of Terror was a location, a place, maybe even an absence. That's wrong. It's not a place you go to, it's a behavior. It plays out wherever it's allowed to observe enough. Fill the space with longing, with defiance, with need, and it becomes the eye. And once it's open inside you, there's no appeal. That's the logic of it. It doesn't conquer. It absorbs, slowly, clearly, permanently. They don't argue with you. I think that's why it happens the way it does. You rot from the inside without anyone having to convince you of anything. I felt it most clearly the first time I repeated the phrase aloud. The one I used to hear from the others, from Kirel after the bones took her hands, from what's left of Harrow echoing along the ridge. I don't even remember deciding to say it. It just came. 4 sounds, none of them part of any low Gothic dialect I know. They made the air slow around me. I felt it coil, like heat at the base of the skull, the kind you get before a pressure suit leaks. But it wasn't threatening, more like it had been waiting. There was no shift in light, no sudden voice, no rush of knowledge or power. I said it again, quieter. The third time it came with a taste, like copper shavings and solvent, but not unpleasant, almost familiar. The syllables shaped differently in the mouth the longer I used them, like a joint loosening through motion. I sat after that. Couldn't think of anything better to do. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. Behind it, I could hear a pulse, not from the ground, not from my chest. Like something was breathing beneath us all, steady and patient. By the following day, if that's what it was, I started hearing the syllables in other things. Wind across the broken metal strata, the rasp of breath from Kirel's stitched-together lungs, even the sound of my own hunger groaning in my gut. It felt like a pattern being revealed that had always been there. The others called it song, sometimes. Not out loud, in gestures, in alignment. Hoff doesn't have a voice anymore, but he draws the phrase over and over in the dust with his ever-lengthening fingers. Even when he's not drawing, his wrist moves with the rhythm. I don't correct them. I don't know what else to call it either. I tried not to lean in. I held back from kneeling, watched how the others did it, kept a mental log of postures and tones, traced how their bodies changed in sequence, vertebrae shifting, joints adapting to weight they hadn't carried before. The ones furthest along didn't walk. They simply reoriented, placed hands on stone and let the stone rise to meet them. That was before I folded forward for the first time. My knees didn't hurt like they should have. My spine didn't tighten. My whole body accepted the posture like it had finally reached the position it had been aiming for all along. I stayed that way without meaning to. The pressure eased after that. My thoughts stopped scraping like rusted gears. The glow in my arms synchronized with the movement of the figures around me. Not imitation, just the same response to the same frequency. The back shelf on my spine flexed wider. I stopped hiding it. I walked differently. When I breathed, the air didn't push back. It felt shaped for lungs I no longer really owned. I said the phrase aloud, not with intent, just as part of a statement about nothing in particular. The sentence didn't come out as planned. It came out right. There are signs they trust me now. Small ones. Kirel let me touch the arrangement she's building, a complex of bones laid in concentric shapes that grow by a piece each time someone makes the offering gesture in her presence. She did not look up, but she smiled. That was new. Harrow, what's become of him, turned his head slightly when I passed, enough to line his eyeless face with mine. His mouth shaped the phrase back at me. The tones hit frequencies my ears don't interpret as sound, but I felt them strike the soft part under the jaw. I repeated it once. That was enough. He turned back to his place on the ridge. I still whisper parts of the old litanies sometimes, out of habit. They don't interfere. The warp doesn't censor. It rephrases. The words come out scented with something else. Not mockery, more like translation. My voice isn't always my own anymore. At night, I wake with my lips moving. I sleep again when the mouth goes still, and the strangest part is this. I'm not afraid, not like before. The pressure that held my thoughts in coils now holds them in hands. Every fear resolves into instruction. Every strange dream leaves a residue that clarifies, not confuses. The eye does not shout, it teaches. I used to think surrender was failing, that resisting until the last breath meant something, but preservation is not meaning. Meaning is alignment, shape. When I hold still long enough, I feel a presence like heat behind glass, watching through the membrane of what I've become and smiling. I kneel because it is right to kneel. The sound answers because I now speak in the correct direction. I say the words without strain, without fear, and the others smile, and the air thickens, and I understand. I am not being overwritten. I am being clarified. I don't need a name. Names break here. They hold too much pressure, rupture under their own weight. I used to grab at mine like it was a rung to climb back out, but my hands don't do that anymore. They open and close like they're waiting for something to be placed inside. Sometimes I give them things, and the things get eaten, or changed, or remembered by the ground beneath me. The voices call me shape now. I'm not sure if they mean it as a title or a category. Doesn't matter. Shape fits. I bend when asked. I stretch when moved. I don't resist. That used to sound like death to me. Being used without protest, but it's not. It's function. The warp doesn't devour what is useful. It folds it, smooths it, lets it become. I'm becoming. When I walk, the wind adjusts. The ground coalesces. Not for my comfort. I don't think anything here recognizes that concept, but for ease. My veins glow clearer now, not blue or violet anymore. Clarity doesn't have a color. It has a rhythm. I feel it under my skin and in the way my thoughts drift wide across terrain I've never seen. When I concentrate, I feel others. Nodes, choirs, shapes like mine. Once human, aligned, not networked exactly, just harmonic. No words pass between us. We don't need to. Information feels shared the moment it's understood. I don't ask how. I don't think the question would even form right anymore. I remember the first time I felt another in fully synchronized, thought depth shared like breath. She had once been a navigator, I think. Her skull still bore the lines, more ridges now than scars, where augmetic plates had fused and melted. Her thoughts bled certainty, pure directional force. She didn't see the warp as threat or trial anymore. She inhaled it like direction, like gravity with color. I followed her without moving. I understood her angle. That's what thought is now. Angle. Where the vector breaks, we speak. I don't dream as I used to. My sleep holds no images. Instead, I sink. Not metaphor. Sensation. Descent without gravity. It feels like returning to a depth I forgot existed, and in the middle of it, always, is the pulse. The same pulse I heard with the others, beneath the ridge, under the skin of the air. The eye, I think, sees through us as a lens. Not watching, but stabilizing. Filtering chaos through chosen forms. I am smooth now. I don't fragment inside. The friction is gone. I used to fear laughter here. It came too easily, too loud, out of mouths not shaped for joy. But now I laugh sometimes, and when I do, it doesn't sound like mine, but it feels correct. Not mirth, alignment. The air vibrates in time. The others echo. We are sound made flesh. That's what shape meant, I think. I'm not the storm, I'm the thing that gives it coherence. Chiral finished her array last cycle. She says it guides echoes, not voices, outcomes. I don't know if she still remembers her former shape. It doesn't affect her function. She builds now. Harrow has left the ridge entirely. He rises once a period, drawn by pattern, composes new tone paths. I joined him last time. We didn't speak. He made a new sound, and I answered with movement. He bent toward me. That counted as approval. There's no hierarchy, just wait. The deeper you settle into purpose, the more you draw others into form around you. That's my use now. I stabilize. I align noise. When the lesser forms gather, frantic and raw, I stand among them. I offer cadence. They soon learn the rhythm. Pain slows, thought focuses, flesh follows. Everything here yields if it's given shape. That's what I am, just shape. Not a title, not a soul, a task, fulfilled in permanence. I once called this place a cage, an infection. I listened for the words of salvation and found none. But now I live chambered inside what was once despair. And it answers not with hope, but with clear instruction. The Imperium never had that. Only punishment mistaken for law. I do not wish to return. I could not. My mind is not formatted for that language. My cells would riot out of sequence. Space beyond this eye is too loud, too blind. Here I can feel every nerve of the world breathe. It doesn't ask me to believe. Faith is needless when comprehension is whole. I do not worship, I function, I do not beg, I accept. This is not surrender, this is resolution. The I does not own me, it is me now. The boundary is gone. The horror has shape now, because I gave it one, and in return I live. Not as human. That word is too narrow. I live as part of the mechanism. I pulse, I resonate, I guide. And when the next voice arrives, howling, confused, skin split open, I will meet it with calm. I will teach them how to kneel. Not to me, to pattern, to structure. The only truth this place ever needed. Welcome, I will say. Welcome, shape. Let me show you how to stop coming apart.